My husband held up a giant check for $17.8 million on national television. I was still celebrating when his text arrived, "Do not come home." By the time I reached our porch, the locks were changed. They thought their ironclad prenup would erase me from the narrative without a cent, but they forgot to read the fine print. That oversight just made me $6.6 million richer. My name is Harper Lane, and at 34 years old, I thought I understood the shape of my life. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the gray sky over the city feels like a wet wool blanket, when I walked out of the glass doors of Northbridge Analytics. I was digging for my car keys when my phone buzzed against my palm. It was a video call from my husband, Dylan. When I answered, the screen was shaking. Dylan was pale, his eyes wide and frantic, but it was the background that caught my attention. He was standing in front of a convenience store monitor, and the neon ticker above his head was frozen on a single, impossible number. "Harper," he stammered, his voice cracking through the speaker. I think I just did it." "Look." He flipped the camera. The digital numbers burned red. $17.8 million. My stomach dropped, not with joy, but with a strange, heavy premonition. I forced a smile, but my mind instantly flashed back to a sterile office 3 years ago. I remembered the cold mahogany table and the way Dylan had squeezed my hand under it, his palm sweating against mine. "It is just a formality, babe," he had whispered then, pleading with his eyes. "Just to make Mom sleep at night. You know I do not care about the money. What is mine is yours." I had signed. I had signed because I loved him, and because I was naive enough to think love was a currency that held value in the Ward family. By the time I got home that night, our quiet suburban house had been invaded. It felt less like a celebration and more like a hostile takeover. Valeria Ward, my mother-in-law, was already there. Directing traffic in my kitchen, her younger son, Owen, was popping champagne that I had been saving for our anniversary. In the corner, a man I had never met sat with a briefcase on his knees. He was introduced only as Grant Bell, a family attorney. The atmosphere was brittle. Every time I moved toward Dylan, Valeria intercepted me. She adjusted his collar, handed him a drink, and physically positioned herself between us. When I tried to stand next to my husband for a photo, she clicked her tongue. "Step out of the frame." "Harper," she said, her voice sugary sweet but sharp as glass. "Let us keep the focus on the winner. We need to think about the optics now. We need to protect Dylan. Later," as she poured herself a glass of wine. She leaned against the counter and looked me up and down. "You know," she mused, swirling the red liquid, "money like this changes things. It requires a certain caliber of person to handle it. You do not want to be a burden on him now, do you? He has so much to think about." I looked at Dylan for defense, but he was staring at his shoes, swirling the ice in his glass. He did not say a word. The guillotine fell the next morning. I was at a coffee shop near my office, trying to buy a latte. The card reader beeped an angry tone. Declined. I tried again. Declined. I pulled up my banking app, and the screen turned my blood to ice. Our joint account, the one we used for everything, was locked. The balance was unavailable. But in the transaction history, there was a pending transfer processed at 3 a.m. for $5,000 labeled "Simply Legal Consultation." I drove home, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I slid my key into the front door lock, it didn't turn. It stuck halfway, hitting a mechanism that wasn't there yesterday. I stepped back and looked down, on the welcome mat. 3 cardboard boxes sat in a neat row: my clothes, my laptop, my toiletries. Taped to the top box was a piece of printer paper with 3 words written in thick black marker: "The Wards only." My phone rang. It was Dylan. "Dylan," I asked, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "The key doesn't work." "What is going on?" "Mom says it is best if you..." "If you go stay somewhere else for a while," Dylan said. His voice sounded robotic, rehearsed. "With the money and everything, we need to restructure. Don't make this ugly, Harper. Just go." I stood there, the wind cutting through my coat, looking at the house I had painted, the garden I had planted. "Okay," I said. I hung up. I did not scream. I did not bang on the door. I crouched down and lifted the flap of the first box. Lying right on top of my old sweaters was a leather-bound notebook I used for work. Tucked inside, it was a thick envelope I hadn't looked at in years. It was my copy of the prenup. I pulled it out. The paper felt heavy. I opened it to the back page, where the signatures were scrawled in black ink, but my eyes were drawn to the margins. There, in faded blue ballpoint pen, were notes written in a cramped, hurried hand. They were written by my aunt, a paralegal who had passed away 6 months after our wedding. She had reviewed the document the night before I signed it, insisting on adding notes I had been too in love to read carefully. I ran my thumb over the blue ink. They thought they had locked me out. They thought the game was over. But standing on that cold porch, I realized they had forgotten the most important rule of war: never leave your enemy with the weapon that can destroy you. Sienna Brooks's apartment smelled of stale coffee and righteous indignation. My best friend was pacing the length of her small living room, her phone clutched in her hand like a grenade she was desperate to throw. "I am posting it. Harper," Sienna spat, her thumb hovering over the screen. "I am going to tag every news outlet in the state. I will title it, 'The $17 million Scumbag.' People need to know." I sat on her beige sofa, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. "No," I said. My voice was quiet but steady. "No social media, no calls. Just observe. Observe." Sienna stopped pacing and stared at me. "They locked you out of your own house like a stray dog. You cannot just sit there. If I react, I look crazy. If I look crazy, they win. They are waiting for me to scream." I replied. My phone pinged. It was an email notification. The sender was Grant Bell, the lawyer who had sat in my living room the night before. The subject line read, "Settlement proposal regarding voluntary departure." I opened it. The text was polite, corporate, and venomous. It stated that since I had chosen to leave the marital residence during this stressful transition, the Ward family was graciously offering me a one-time payment of $5,000 for relocation assistance. All I had to do was sign a document confirming that my departure was voluntary and that I waived any claim to residency. $5,000. I read aloud. "They are trying to buy my resignation from my own marriage for the price of a used car?" Before I could process the insult, another message arrived. This one was a text from Valeria. "My son needs space to process his blessing." The message read, "Do not make this difficult. You were a phase. We both know you were never really one of us." Attached to the text was a photo taken just hours ago. It showed Dylan at a high-end bar holding a champagne flute. Leaning into his shoulder, laughing with her hand on his chest, was a stunning woman with platinum blonde hair. Dylan looked intoxicated, but he also looked relieved. I felt a sharp crack in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe through it. I closed my eyes and let the image of the prenup signing replay in my mind. It had been 3 years ago. We were in a rush to get to the rehearsal dinner. The papers were stacked high. "Just sign here, and here, and here," Dylan had said, tapping the pages. My lawyer already handled the boring stuff. Trust me. I had trusted him. I had signed without reading the fine print because I thought reading it meant I doubted his love. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old envelope I had rescued from the box on the porch. I slid the documents out. My aunt's handwriting in blue ink was scattered across the margins, but one note near the bottom of page 12 caught my eye. She had underlined a section twice and written "Windfall Clause Eviction Trigger." I frowned. I did not remember a windfall clause. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the small law firm where my aunt used to work. She had been gone for 2 years, but the firm was still active. A young man answered on the second ring. "This is Harper Lane," I said. "My aunt, Sarah Miller, worked there. She reviewed a prenuptial agreement for me 3 years ago. I need to know if there are any notes in the digital file." There was a long pause, the sound of typing, and then the lawyer came back on the line. "Yes, Mrs. Lane." I see the file. It notes that there was a standard prenup, but there was also an Addendum B processed the same day. It was a separate rider regarding unexpected asset acquisition and spousal protection. "Addendum B?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. I do not have a copy of that." "That is strange," the lawyer said. "It was notarized. You should have been given a copy immediately." I hung up. The room seemed to tilt. They hadn't just used the prenup against me. They had hidden the second half of it. I realized then that Dylan had not just been careless that day. He had been coached. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from social media. Dylan had posted a status update. "Winning the lottery really shows you who your true friends are. Sad to realize some people only loved you for what you could give them. Time to start fresh with people who are real." The comments were already pouring in, strangers congratulating him and calling me a gold digger without even knowing my name. Sienna looked at the screen over my shoulder and gasped. "Oh, he did not just do that. Give me the phone. Harper, I am going to kill him." "No," I said, placing the phone face down on the table. I opened my laptop and created a new blank document. I did not type a rant. I did not write a letter to Dylan. I typed 2 words in bold at the top of the page. "Evidence map," underneath. I began to type. Item 1. Locks changed at 4 in the afternoon. Item 2. Text from Dylan admitting his mother ordered me out. Item 3. Email from Grant Bell attempting to classify eviction as voluntary departure. Item 4. The missing addendum. B. I looked at the cursor blinking on the white screen. They wanted a war. They wanted me to be the emotional, hysterical ex-wife they could dismiss. Instead, I was going to be the historian of their destruction. Mariah Klein's office did not look like a place for comfort. It looked like a surgical theater designed for dissecting assets. She sat behind a desk of tempered glass, her fingers tapping rhythmically on a file folder. She was in her 40s, with hair cut sharp enough to draw blood and eyes that had seen every variation of marital betrayal. "Let me be clear, Harper," Mariah said, her voice devoid of sympathy but heavy with competence. "If they were confident enough to change the locks and throw your clothes on the porch, it means they think you do not have the original documents. They think you are walking into a gunfight with a plastic spoon." She slid a stack of papers across the glass toward me. "I need you to sign these authorizations. We are not just going to request the prenup. We are going to pull the notary logs from the county clerk. Every signature, every timestamp, every modification made on that day 3 years ago." I signed my name. The ink felt permanent. The next step was darker. I did not need to know who Dylan was sleeping with. I needed to know who he was banking with. I hired Evan Cross, a private investigator who specialized in forensic accounting. He was a quiet man who smelled of stale tobacco in server rooms. "I do not do bedroom photos. Evan told me when we met at a diner on the edge of town. I do not care about his bedroom." I replied. "I care about his ledger. Follow the $17.8 million. 2 days later, Evan handed me a dossier. It was thin, but it was heavy with implications. "Dylan never touched the money personally," Evan said, pointing to a highlighted flowchart. "The Lottery Commission cut the check, but it was deposited directly into a newly formed entity called the Ward Horizon Trust. The trust was registered exactly 48 hours after the numbers were drawn." I scanned the document. The trust was insulated, designed to be a fortress. But then Evan flipped the page. "Here is the leak," he said. "A company called Ward Legacy Consulting started billing the trust the day it was funded. Weekly invoices for asset management consultation." I looked at the incorporation papers for Ward Legacy Consulting. The registered agent was Valeria Ward. My mother-in-law had set up a shell company to siphon the winnings out of the trust before they could ever be considered marital assets. I took the findings back to Mariah. She studied the invoices, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "This is sloppy," Mariah said. "If they are using the trust to bypass the prenup, they are walking a fine line. But if they are moving money to a shell company to defraud a spouse, they are setting themselves on fire. We just need to prove the intent." That was when the memory hit me. It was visceral. I was back in the conference room 3 years ago. I remembered the notary, a woman with nervous hands. Before she stamped the final page, she had paused. She had looked at Dylan, who was staring at the table, and then she had looked up at Valeria. It was a look of confirmation, a look that asked, "Is this the plan?" "The notary," I whispered. She knew. She looked at Valeria for permission before she notarized the last page. Mariah picked up the phone. "Then let us see what her logbook says." The county records arrived digitally the next afternoon. We sat side by side, scrolling through the scanned pages of the notary's official logbook from that date. There was my signature for the standard prenup. There was Dylan's signature, and then, right below it, there was a third entry. Same date, same timestamp, same notary seal. Title Addendum B, Spousal Asset Protection Rider. "I never saw this," I said, my voice shaking. "I never held this paper, but you signed something that day that they told you was a copy," Mariah said, her eyes narrowing. "Or they slipped it into the stack. It does not matter. The log proves it exists. They hid a legal document executed during the marriage." I stared at the screen. The anger that had been burning in my chest turned into something colder, something solid. This was no longer about a broken heart or a stolen home. It was not about screaming at Dylan or begging Valeria for mercy. "They think this is a family dispute," I said, closing the laptop. "They are wrong. This is a paperwork error, and I am going to be the one who corrects it." Mariah Klein moved with the speed of a woman who knew the court system ran on deadlines, not justice. By 9 in the morning, she had filed an emergency motion to freeze marital assets and a temporary restraining order against the dissipation of funds. "We are stopping the bleeding," Mariah said, her eyes fixed on her tablet while she shoved a bagel into her mouth. "Until a judge sees that Addendum B, nobody spends a dime of that $17.8 million. I spent the afternoon standing on my own front porch, flanked by a uniformed sheriff's deputy. It was the only way I was allowed to enter. The house smelled the same lemon polish and stale air, but it felt like a museum exhibit I was no longer allowed to touch. I had 20 minutes to pack essentials. I went straight to my home office. I needed my birth certificate and the tax returns from 2 years ago. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. It was empty. The metal tracks were bare. Every single piece of paper, from our marriage license to the utility bills, was gone. "Ma'am, you need to hurry it up," the deputy called from the hallway. I walked out with a suitcase of clothes and a hollow feeling in my stomach. They were not just locking me out, they were erasing the paper trail of our life together. Back at Sienna's apartment, my phone vibrated with a message from Evan Cross. It was a series of high-resolution photos taken through the window of a downtown bank. "Look at the body language," Evan texted. I zoomed in. Dylan was sitting at a desk, signing a stack of documents. Grant Bell was pointing at the signature line. But it was the woman standing behind Dylan who made my blood run cold. Valeria was leaning over his shoulder, her hand resting on the back of his neck. She wasn't comforting him. She was steering him. An hour later, my phone lit up again. This time, it was Dylan. He sent a photo of a document titled Separation Agreement. "Sign it." His text read, "Sign it and you will be at peace. Stop fighting, Harper." I stared at the screen. He was offering me peace in exchange for silence. "Do not reply," Mariah commanded when I forwarded her the screenshot. "He wants a reaction. We will give him a litigation hold instead." She drafted the email immediately. It was a formal legal notice sent to Grant Bell and copied to Dylan, demanding the preservation of all electronic evidence. We demanded every text message, every email, and every call log from the moment the lottery numbers were announced. We were effectively telling them that if they deleted a single byte of data, they were committing a felony. Sienna, who had been scrolling through my old cloud backups on her laptop, suddenly gasped. "Harper," she said, her voice tight. "You need to listen to this. It is a voicemail from 6 months ago. You archived it." She pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Dylan's voice, slurred and heavy with whiskey. "I do not know why you are worried. Babe," the recording said. Mom says just kick her out if it gets bad. She says the prenup shuts your mouth tight. She says we are bulletproof." The recording clicked off. Mariah looked up from her laptop, her eyes sharp. "Play that again." Sienna played it. "If the prenup shuts your mouth," Mariah murmured, dissecting the sentence. That is specific phrasing. If they believed the prenup was a standard division of assets, they would say it protects the money. But saying it shuts you up means they are afraid of what you can say. They are afraid of a specific clause. I pulled out my notebook and turned to the page marked Evidence Map. My hand was shaking, but I forced it to be steady. I began to draw the timeline of the last 72 hours. Tuesday night, the jackpot win. Wednesday morning, the joint account frozen. Wednesday afternoon, the ward horizon. Trust established. Wednesday evening, the locks changed. Thursday morning, the voluntary departure letter. It was a perfect militarized sequence. They hadn't panicked. They had executed a plan. They did not come up with this in a day, I said, circling the date of the trust formation. Valeria had this playbook ready. She was just waiting for the money to trigger it. I looked at the timeline. The anger that had been consuming me began to cool into something useful. I was done crying. I was done asking why. We do not confront them yet. I told Mariah and Sienna, we let them think I am scared. We let them think I am broke and desperate. And while they are busy patting themselves on the back, we collect every piece of paper they forgot to shred. The envelope Evan Cross placed on the table was thick, but he did not slide it over with the usual grimace of a man delivering bad news. He looked almost amused. Inside were high-definition telephoto shots of Dylan walking into the St. Regis Hotel. He was not alone. The platinum blonde from the party was on his arm, her hand resting possessively on his bicep. "Standard marital misconduct," I said, looking at the image of my husband smiling at another woman less than 48 hours after kicking me out. "This triggers the infidelity clause." "Better," Evan corrected, tapping the photo. "That is not a girlfriend. That is Chloe Vance. She is a crisis PR specialist. She charges $2,000 an hour to clean up image problems for high-net-worth individuals." I stared at the photo, the intimacy, the laughing, the hand-holding. It was all staged. Valeria hired her. Evan continued, pulling out a copy of a wire transfer. "She hired a PR firm to rebrand Dylan as the eligible bachelor before your marriage is even legally over. And here is the kicker: she paid the retainer using the Ward Horizon Trust." My blood ran cold. They were using the lottery winnings, technically still marital assets, until a judge said otherwise, to fund a campaign designed to erase me. Mariah Klein let out a sharp, satisfied exhale. She was holding my copy of the prenup, the one we had retrieved from the notary's log. They overplayed their hand. Mariah said, "Look at Article 4, Section C. It is a protection against third-party interference. It says that if a family member of the primary earner takes steps to deprive the spouse of residency through coercion or undue influence, it triggers a liquidated damages penalty." "They kicked me out to protect the money," I said. "And in doing so," Mariah replied, "they just activated a penalty that might cost them more than the house is worth." We met them the next morning. The conference room at Grant Bell's office was lined with mahogany and smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. Dylan sat at the far end of the table. He looked tired. His new suit didn't fit him quite right, as if he was wearing a costume. Grant Bell sat next to him, tapping a gold pen against a legal pad. I sat down. I did not say hello. "This is a waste of time," Dylan said, staring at a spot on the wall just above my head. "You do not belong in my world anymore. Harper, it is better if we just cut ties cleanly." The words were wooden. They sounded memorized. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Who wrote that line for you?" "Dylan. Was it your mother? Or was it Grant?" Dylan flinched. His eyes darted to Grant, then back to me. "That is not. I am making my own decisions." "Are you?" I asked softly. "Because you locked your wife out of her home based on a lie. Mom just wants to protect assets." Dylan stammered, his voice rising in frustration. "She said you would drain me dry." The room went silent. Mariah's pen moved across her notepad with a scratching sound that seemed deafening. Dylan had just admitted, on the record, that his mother was the architect of the eviction. Grant Bell cleared his throat loudly. "My client is under immense stress. I think we are done for today." As we packed up, Mariah leaned in close to Grant. "Mr. Bell, I was reading through the State Bar's disciplinary records last night. I noticed you had a suspension 4 years ago for a conflict of interest regarding family trusts. I would hate for the ethics board to see you are managing a trust where the beneficiary is your client, but the trustee is his mother. It looks messy." Grant's face turned the color of ash. He snapped his briefcase shut and practically shoved Dylan out the door. Back at the office, the final piece of the puzzle landed. Evan sent over a real estate contract. He put a deposit down this morning. Evan texted, "Penthouse at the Meridian. $4 million. Paid via the trust." I looked at the date. He had signed the intent to purchase the day before he changed the locks. He wasn't just reacting to his mother's orders. He had been planning his new life, a life of penthouses, PR girlfriends, and millions of dollars while I was still making him dinner. I realized then that this wasn't just a breakup. It was an erasure. They didn't just want me to leave. They wanted to scrub me from history so their Cinderella story would be spotless. "They want me to disappear," I whispered to the empty room. "They want a clean slate." I picked up the evidence file. It was heavy now. "They are going to find out," I said. "That ink stains are impossible to get out." Mariah Klein treated subpoenas like ammunition. She fired them off in rapid succession, one to the bank, one to the PR firm, and one to the registrar of the trust. We were not asking for explanations anymore. We were demanding timestamps. We needed to know exactly whose hand held the pen and at what second the ink hit the paper. "They are going to stall," Mariah said, stacking the filing receipts on her desk. "But every day they delay is another day they look guilty of obstruction." The countermove from the Ward family arrived in an envelope that smelled of expensive perfume. It was an invitation from a local morning talk show. Wake Up City. The producer claimed they wanted to hear my side of the story regarding the recent lottery win. "It is a trap," Sienna said, reading the email over my shoulder. "Valeria wants you on live TV so she can paint you as the bitter, money-hungry ex-wife while Dylan plays the saint." "I know," I said. "But we are going to accept." Mariah looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Only if we control the battlefield." We sent back a response with 3 non-negotiable conditions. All questions had to be submitted in writing 24 hours in advance. My lawyer had to approve the final script, and the station had to provide a signed disclosure of all segment sponsors. They hesitated, but the allure of the drama was too strong. They agreed. When the sponsor list arrived, Mariah let out a low, dark laugh. Listed right at the top as the platinum partner for the segment was an entity called Ward Legacy Consulting. "She is paying to humiliate you," Mariah said, "and she is using the lottery money to do it. This connects the smear campaign directly to the windfall." The studio was freezing cold. The host, a woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, leaned in as the cameras rolled. She ignored the pre-approved questions immediately. So, Harper, she began, her voice dripping with faux concern. It must be hard seeing your husband win $17.8 million right as the marriage falls apart. Do you feel entitled to a share? I did not flinch. I looked directly into the camera lens, imagining Valeria watching from her living room. I respect the law, I said, my voice steady and flat. I also respect the paperwork. I stopped. I didn't say another word. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy, until the host awkwardly cut to a commercial break. As I walked off the set, Mariah was already hitting send on a legal notice to the station's general counsel. We were notifying them that their platinum partner was using marital assets to fund harassment, and by airing the segment, the station was now complicit in a financial crime. Valeria's reaction was instantaneous. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You ungrateful little rat. You think you are clever? You are playing with fire. I did not reply. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Evan Cross to trace the IP address. That evening, Dylan called. He sounded different, less robotic, more desperate. Harper, please, he said. This is getting out of hand. Mom is furious. Look, I can get you some cash. We can end this tonight. I stood in Sienna's kitchen, watching the tea kettle boil. How much? Dylan, $50,000. He whispered, cash, no taxes. Just sign the papers and stop the subpoenas. I almost laughed. $50,000. That was the price they had put on my dignity. It proved they had sat down and calculated exactly how much it would cost to make me disappear. You should have read the addendum. Dylan, I said, and hung up. I looked at the black screen of my phone. The public circus was over. They had tried to shame me in the open, and it had backfired. Now, the fight was moving into the closed rooms of high-rise offices where screams didn't matter, and the only thing that spoke was the undeniable authority of a signed contract. They thought they had won the lottery, but they were about to realize they had just purchased a lawsuit. The bank records arrived in 3 heavy boxes that smelled of toner and secrets. Mariah Klein and I spent 6 hours sifting through the dense financial fog, and when we finally found the structure of the trust, Mariah let out a low, dangerous whistle. Harper, look at this, she said, tapping a clause on page 40. The Ward Horizon Trust was established as irrevocable. That is highly unusual for a lottery win. Usually, you want access to your liquidity, but an irrevocable trust means Dylan signed away his control the moment the ink dried. He cannot spend a dime without the trustee's approval. She flipped to the signature page. And look who drafted it. Not a senior partner. It was drafted by a junior paralegal under the direct supervision of Grant Bell. I leaned in to look at the document. My husband had not just locked me out. He had locked himself in a cage built by his mother and her lawyer. Mariah pulled another sheet from the stack. It was a transfer of rights document, authorizing the movement of funds. Look at Dylan's signature here, she pointed out. See the trailing line on the D. It is shaky, and the date is wrong. He dated it for the previous day. This suggests he was either intoxicated or under extreme duress when he signed. If we can prove he did not understand what he was signing, we can void this entire transaction. Then came the smoking gun. Evan Cross walked in, looking more energized than I had ever seen him. He dropped a single sheet of paper on the glass desk. I found the leak, Evan said, on the night they changed your locks, exactly 2 hours after you left the porch. A wire transfer was initiated. $240,000. To who I asked. Grant Bell. The memo line says legal retainer, Evan said, a grim smile playing on his lips. But the routing number does not go to a law firm. It goes to a personal checking account at Chase Bank. The account holder is Valeria Ward. I felt a wave of nausea. She had looted $250,000 from her own son's winnings before the confetti had even settled, using my eviction as the distraction. Why, I asked, She has the trust. Why steal the cash because she is drowning? Evan replied. I dug into her tax history. Valeria has 3 federal tax liens against her property. She owes the IRS nearly $200,000. She did not kick you out just because she hates you. Harper. She kicked you out because she needed quick access to the cash without you asking questions. The lottery was her only way out of bankruptcy. The pieces were falling into place. But we still needed the weapon. We needed Addendum B. Mariah's team had been tracing the notary log we found earlier. The trail led us not to a filing cabinet, but to a safety deposit box at First National. We subpoenaed the access log. The box is not in Dylan's name, Mariah said, reading the report, and it is not in Valeria's name. It is rented by Grant Bell. He is hiding the contract in his personal box, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He knows it destroys them. Mariah held up a digital scan we had recovered from the paralegal's hard drive, the draft of the document hiding in that box. Read Section 8, Mariah commanded. I read it. The legalese was dense, but the math was simple. It was a liquidated damages clause designed to protect the spouse in the event of a sudden change in financial status. It stated that if the lower-earning spouse was removed from the marital residence via coercion or lockout following a financial windfall, they were entitled to a tiered payout. I looked at the number at the highest tier. $6.6 million, I whispered. They locked you out to save money, Mariah said, her voice hard as steel. But because they didn't read their own prenup, that lockout just cost them 1/3 of the jackpot. They think hiding the addendum saves them. But hiding a material contract that is fraud, that turns a civil dispute into a criminal conspiracy. The rage I had felt for days suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I could have posted the tax liens on social media. I could have humiliated Valeria to the world right now, but that was too small. I do not want to embarrass them on the internet. I told Mariah. I want to eviscerate them in a courtroom. I want the judge to see the liens, the theft, and the hidden contract. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Dylan. What do you want? His text read. Just tell me what you want to stop this. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every letter. I want the truth on paper. The air in the courtroom was recycled and cold, smelling faintly of floor wax and anxious sweat. We were not before a jury yet. This was an evidentiary hearing, a battle to determine which pieces of paper would be allowed to define my life. Judge Hallowell sat behind the bench, a woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a face that suggested she had zero patience for domestic theater. Grant Bell stood up first. He looked less like the arrogant shark I had met in his office and more like a man trying to hold water in a sieve. Your Honor, Grant began. Smoothing his tie, we moved to dismiss Addendum B. Ms. Lane claims she was unaware of its existence. If she did not knowingly sign it with full comprehension, it cannot be binding. It is a ghost document. Mariah Klein did not even look up from her notes. She waited for him to finish, then stood up slowly. If Ms. Lane was unaware, Your Honor, it is because the document was deliberately concealed from her immediately after execution. But we do not need to guess. We have the notary. Mrs. Higgins, the notary from 3 years ago, took the stand. She was a small, nervous woman, but under oath, her memory was crystal clear. I remember that day, Mrs. Higgins said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mrs. Ward, the mother, was standing right behind the bride. She kept tapping her watch. She kept saying, "We are late. Just sign. Do not read. Just sign." It felt rushed, coercive. Judge Hallowell shifted her gaze to Valeria, who was sitting in the gallery, stiff as a statue. The judge's eyes narrowed. Then came the pivot. Mariah called Grant Bell to the stand regarding the chain of custody of the document. Mr. Bell, Mariah said, her voice deceptively light. Can you explain to the court why the original copy of Addendum B was found not in the client's file, not in the firm's vault, but in your personal safety deposit box at First National Bank? The room went dead silent. Grant blinked rapidly. It was for safekeeping, he stammered. Given the sensitive nature of the asset protection clauses, I thought it was best to keep it secure. Secure from whom? Mariah snapped. From the wife who was a signatory, or from the court? Objection. Dylan's second lawyer shouted, but the damage was done. The judge was writing furiously on her notepad. Dylan could not take the silence. He stood up, his face flushed. I did not know about the box. I just listened to my mother. She said she handled the legal side. Sit down, Mr. Ward, the bailiff barked. I looked at my husband. He was trying to play the victim, the helpless son caught in a web. I spoke up, my voice cutting through the noise. You listened to your mother? I said, looking him dead in the eye. But that is your signature on the eviction notice. Dylan. And that is your signature on the check that paid for my locks to be changed. Mariah did not let the momentum die. She dropped the final bomb, the evidence of the smear campaign. She presented the text messages from the unknown number and the recording of the talk show. Your Honor, this is not just a divorce, Mariah argued. This is a coordinated campaign of harassment funded by marital assets. She handed the judge the sponsor disclosure form from the television station. The segment attacking my client was paid for by Ward Legacy Consulting, Mariah said. An entity funded entirely by the lottery winnings. They used the marital estate to pay for public defamation. Judge Hallowell looked at the document, then looked at Valeria. The disgust on the judge's face was undisguised. She banged her gavel. Enough. The judge said, I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order on the Ward Horizon Trust. No funds over $1,000 are to be moved without court approval. I am appointing a special master to audit the transfers to Ward Legacy Consulting. She looked at Dylan and Grant. And I am ordering mandatory mediation to take place within 10 days. If you come back into my courtroom without a settlement, be prepared for a forensic audit of every penny that has moved through this family in the last 5 years. When the hearing ended, the energy in the room had shifted. The Ward family was no longer the hunter. I packed my bag. Dylan looked across the aisle at me. His eyes were wide, fearful, searching for the woman who used to smooth things over, the wife who used to fix his messes. He looked at me like he expected me to come over and tell him it would be okay. I zipped my bag shut and turned my back on him. He finally realized that the woman he was looking for did not exist anymore. He had evicted her, and she was never coming back. The evening before the mediation arrived with the weight of a physical blow. A courier delivered a thick envelope to Sienna's apartment just as the sun was setting. It was a counter-motion from the Ward legal team, accusing me of attempted extortion and claiming that my demand for $6.6 million was a malicious calculation designed to inflict emotional distress. I threw the papers onto the coffee table. Extortion. They signed the contract. Mariah Klein did not blink. She was sitting at the kitchen island, organizing her binders for the next morning. It is a standard tactic. Harper, Mariah said, her voice calm and terrifyingly rational. They want to scare you. Tomorrow, they will offer you a low number. They will try to drag this out for months, hoping you run out of money for legal fees before they run out of patience. Do not mistake exhaustion for losing. Sienna walked into the room, her face pale. She was holding her tablet. You are not going to believe this, Sienna said. I have been monitoring the public filings. Valeria's lawyer just filed a separate affidavit to distance her from the eviction. It claims that Dylan acted independently and without maternal counsel when he changed the locks. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Valeria was preparing to sacrifice her own son to save the money. She was going to argue that the family interference clause did not apply because she hadn't interfered. She was going to claim Dylan did it all on his own. She is feeding him to the wolves, I whispered. He is just a pawn to her. My phone buzzed. It was Evan Cross. He had sent a video file with the caption "Found the neighbor's doorbell camera footage." I pressed play. The grainy black and white video showed my front porch on the night of the eviction. A locksmith was drilling into the door. Standing right next to him, pointing at the handle and gesturing aggressively, was Valeria, and standing 3 feet behind her, head bowed, hands in his pockets, was Dylan. "There is the trigger," Mariah said, pointing at the screen. "She is directing the work. She is paying the workmen." Dylan is just a spectator at his own divorce. That video proves the interference was maternal. It locks in the damages. The house was quiet, but my phone rang again at midnight. It was Dylan, against my better judgment. I answered. Harper, his voice was thick, wet with tears and alcohol. I lost everything. She is not talking to me. Mom locked herself in her room. I do not know what to do. For a second, just a split second, I felt the old instinct to comfort him. I remembered the man who used to make me coffee in the morning. But then the image of the cardboard boxes on the porch flashed in my mind. I saw the note, "The wards only." "You did not lose everything. Dylan," I said into the darkness. "You gave it away. You traded me for a check, and now you are realizing the check might bounce. Please," he sobbed, "just come back. We can fix this. The locks are changed, remember I said," and ended the call. Mariah looked up from her laptop one last time before we went to sleep. Her eyes were gleaming. "I just got an alert from a contact at the state tax board," she said, "because of the suspicious transfers to the shell company and the irrevocable nature of the trust. The IRS is flagging the entire jackpot for an immediate audit. If the wards do not settle this civil suit and close the books quietly, the government is going to freeze every asset they have. The money is going to evaporate." I realized then that I held the match. If they fought me, the whole pile of money would burn. If they paid me, they might salvage what was left. I went to my room and opened my journal. My hand was steady as I picked up the pen. I did not write about my heartbreak. I did not write about the betrayal. I wrote exactly one sentence to anchor myself for the morning. Tomorrow. They will know I read everything. The mediation room was a soundproof box of gray carpet and tension. On one side of the table sat the Ward family, huddled like conspirators on a sinking ship. On the other side, Mariah Klein and I sat in comfortable silence. Grant Bell slid a single piece of paper across the mahogany table. "We are prepared to offer a one-time settlement of $250,000, Grant said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "In exchange, Harper signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and drops all current and future claims against the trust." Valeria sat next to him, arms crossed, looking at me with the imperious glare of a judge. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to take the scraps and run. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Dylan. He was sweating. I shook my head once. "No." Mariah reached into her briefcase and pulled out the original Addendum B. She placed it gently on the table and tapped her finger on the bottom paragraph. "We are not here to negotiate the price. Gentlemen," Mariah said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "The price was set 3 years ago. Liquidated damages for spousal eviction following a windfall event. The number is $6.6 million. Valeria scoffed. "That is ridiculous. She did not even know that paper existed." "But you did," Mariah countered, "and hiding it was a felony. So, we are not negotiating the money. We are negotiating whether or not I hand over the evidence of fraud to the district attorney this afternoon." Dylan slammed his fist on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "You ruined me," he screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. "I had everything, and you tore it all down. You ruined me." "Harper." I looked at the man I had once vowed to love forever. I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. "I did not ruin you, Dylan," I said, my voice steady. "You ruined yourself the moment you picked up that key and changed the locks on my door. You chose the money over the marriage. I am just balancing the ledger." Grant Bell looked at the document on the table, then at Mariah. He saw the disciplinary file she had on the edge of her desk. "Mr. Bell," Mariah said softly, "if you do not attest to the validity of this addendum right now, I will file a complaint regarding your personal safety deposit box. You will lose your license." Grant did not hesitate. He turned to Valeria. "It is over. Mrs. Ward, we have to settle. I cannot protect you on this one." "You directed me to hide it," Valeria gasped, her eyes going wide. "You coward. You work for me, I work for the law," Grant stammered, saving his own skin. Valeria turned her venom on me. "You are stealing my son's money. You are a thief." "No," I replied. "I am taking the exact price you agreed to pay when you thought I was too stupid to read the fine print." "You bet against my intelligence, Valeria." "You lost." The court-appointed mediator stood up. "This ends now. Mr. Ward, you have two choices. Sign the settlement for $6.6 million, or I dissolve this mediation and we go to trial. And given the IRS audit pending on your trust, a trial will likely freeze your assets for years." Dylan looked at his mother. For the first time, he saw the panic in her eyes. He realized she wasn't trying to save him. She was trying to save the tax-free status of her own shell company. She was ready to let him go to jail for fraud as long as she kept the cash. "Give me the pen," Dylan whispered. "No." Valeria lunged for his hand, but her own lawyer held her back. "Stop it, Valeria," Grant hissed. "You are implicated too. If he does not sign, we all go down for conspiracy." Dylan took the pen. His hand shook, but he signed his name. The scratch of the ink sounded like the final breath of our marriage. The transfer happened 48 hours later. After taxes and legal fees, the wire hit my account. It was not a lottery win. It was a severance package from a nightmare. The victory was absolute. The IRS descended on the Ward Horizon Trust like a swarm of locusts. The $17.8 million was frozen pending a forensic audit. Ward Legacy Consulting was shut down, and Valeria was facing a mountain of fines that would likely bankrupt her. They had won the jackpot, but in their greed to keep it all, they had lost the ability to enjoy a single cent of it. I stood in front of the door of my new apartment. The key in my hand was heavy, solid brass. I slid it into the lock, and it turned smoothly. There were no strange locks here. There were no boxes on the porch. I walked inside, placed the copy of the prenup on the entry table like a hammer that had finally been set down, and pulled out my phone. I sent Sienna a text. I did not get my husband back. I got my life back. Thank you so much for listening to Harper's story of justice and redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment below with your city or country so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to see the truth win.